Right, so welcome everybody. I hope you enjoy our second webinar in the series Bidding to Win. This one's about budget. The first one, which you can catch up if you go to our website, is on schedule. How risky is your promise date? And we are going to have a third one that's coming up this time next month, and that's all about being competitive. How do you make sure you've got the right bid? So let's move on. So Trevor and I today are going to share the webinar. You can see we spread across the world, including in North America, and tend to burn the candle both ends. We're dedicated to helping you do great risk management, not just with our software, but also with our expertise. So I hope you enjoyed this webinar today. The agenda. So we're going to talk about the challenge. I'm going to give you show you a few slides, and then Trevor is going to show you cost risk analysis in practice. We're going to look at how to do that on a bid for real, and then I'll come back, talk about the benefits, and we're going to have a live Q&A session. This will last about 30 minutes, so I hope you can stay for the Q&A session at the end. Right, so what is the challenge? Well, history is littered with problems of difficult projects. KPMG brought out a report in 2021 called Project Delivery Confidence. And that's what we're all about, is trying to get confidence into our bids. You can see here around the globe, enormous amounts of money, $3 trillion or more annual spend on infrastructure projects each year until 2030. Unfortunately, 9 out of 10 mega projects, this report says, are likely to go over budget. Really, really scary with that kind of amount of budget that we're spending. But history is littered with these problems in terms of percentage overruns. The Suez Canal, Scottish Parliament, Sydney Opera House, Montreal Summer Olympics, they were all up in the thousands, somewhere between 1,300 and 1,900% over budget. It's just staggering. If we look at different types of projects, rail projects, typically 45% over budget. Bridges and tunnels, 35% on average over budget. Defence, well, you only have to look at the national audit reports, whether you're in the UK, Australia, Canada, the GAO in America, and you'll see just a plethora of projects that were not only over budget, but ran over and also didn't necessarily deliver the scope that they should have done. So in addition to this KPMG report, there's also a McKinsey report. And if you saw webinar 1, I'm going to show the same picture now. You can see here that on the scale on the left-hand side, this is cost or budget. And on average, projects are 80% over budget. Now, this graph is showing mining, infrastructure, oil and gas. This doesn't even include things like defence, IT, other disaster overruns and over budget projects. So here you can see these projects, some of them overrunning by up to around 600%. But it's not all bad. If you take a different approach to contingency in particular, then you may be able to do a lot better. Our experience in working with Babcock was that they actually took a different view of how to account for contingency. Not only did they use CRA to generate the values, but they also took a different approach to how they apportioned it to use in the product projects and how much they kept for management reserve. So we'll come back to that when Trevor takes you through the actual live demo. So a little bit of background before we go into that. Let's define what we mean by uncertainty and risk, because we really need to understand what inputs we need. We need very good data if we're going to do this kind of analysis. So first of all, uncertainty. Well, we're trying to hit the target. That means our base costs, we're trying to estimate as best we can how much this project's going to cost. And there's going to be a lot of uncertainty about that. So defining uncertainty, it's an amount of potential variation in an activity's cost or duration due to estimating error, because we don't know how much the price of oil, gas, inflation, labour costs, all of those things can vary. Those variables contribute to overruns on your base costs. Then we've got this other thing, this curious thing at the bottom. It's a basket of risks. Now, we work with a basket of risks because in order to do an analysis, we can't just look at one risk. We have to look at a whole bunch of them because they have two elements to them. A risk not only has an estimate of the impact should it occur, but it also has a probability of happening. So it may or may not happen. If it does, then it'll have an uncertain estimate, and that could be similar to the uncertainty above. But the key thing is that it's got a probability, may or may not happen. Okay, so let's take a poll. Let's find out a bit about your bidding practice. So how many of you run multiple cost risk analysis to refine your budgets when you're doing a bid? And by multiple, I mean you start at the beginning and you're refining that data all the way through. How many people only run cost risk analysis towards the end of the bid? Who only runs it if it's asked for? So it depends on the managers, the bid manager, the project manager on this bid. And how many of you have no requirement whatsoever, or the organisation has no ability to run CRA? It's interesting, it varies around the world. I think in Europe, we're more likely to run risk analysis. Australia is pretty mature in risk management, perhaps doesn't use CRA or SRA as much. North America probably a little bit further behind the curve. So yeah, this is, I think it probably shows what I would expect. So we're going to move on and take a look at running a CRA and how you would do it on a bid. How would you build up the answers, the budgets that you're going to put into the mix? So Trevor, if you want to take over. Might butt in though. My manager hat on. I'm gonna ask you some questions. Okay.
Not a problem, Val. Thanks for that. Following on from Val's comment about the work that we did with Babcock, she mentioned that they changed the way that they approached contingency and allocating that to the project managers. Before they started using Predict, basically all they did was to give the project manager an extra percentage, I can't remember what the actual number was, say 5% of the project budget as their contingency to cover risk. So they hadn't really even necessarily identified specific risks that could occur. And surprisingly, well, not surprisingly really, the project managers just took that as extra budget and it never came back. However, when they started using Predict, they had to identify, as I have done here, the risks that could occur and actually assess them. Give them a probability that Val mentioned, and then a potential impact as well. And sitting here, I've just got the average impact. Val did mention that there could be a range of potential impacts if the risk occurred. And what they would then do, and I'm going to do in a minute, is to actually perform the cost risk analysis and give, and in fact we'll talk about it, a certain percentage to the project manager, and they had to come and ask for the extra to be able to, once one of these risks had actually occurred, to actually help pay for it. So there was a big difference in the way they were working. So the key thing really is you need to identify the risks and quantify them, as I've done here. And I've got the two columns. Here's the potential cost impact. Here I've got what we call the factored mean. Sometimes it's called the expected monetary value. So it's multiplying the cost impact by the probability of the risk occurring. And so what we could do is potentially just add these up to see if that gives us a sensible figure as contingency. So if I look at a report here, you can see that I've added up the impacts, and it's sort of 5.75 million that those come to. But that's actually saying that all of the risks have occurred. It will cost me around 5.75 million. Now,
So Trevor, in terms of those two figures, I think, is it the case? I think some people use both of those, don't they? They want to know what's the worst case scenario, but the gross amount of risk, but also the factored value. So the amount factored up by probability.
Yeah, I mean, from a project management point of view, if you had all of this as contingency, you sort of know that you'll be covered because if all of the risks occur, then it's going to be great. But if you're putting a bid together, then really you're going to make yourself pretty uncompetitive if you're including all of that as part of your proposal price.
But the factored mean includes the probabilities, and quite a lot of that is guesswork, isn't it? Still seems better though than the old ways of going, well, if I add 10% or 15% onto this project, then that should cover it. At least we're actually itemizing the risks, and we're calculating a factored mean. Okay.
Yeah. So let's consider, that's a figure we could be using as our contingency. But given that we've got Predict Risk Analyzer now, I can click my Analyze button here, and it will run the Monte Carlo for me, and gives me a result like this. So what this has done is it's run through thousands of times to say, did this risk occur? If it did, what was its impact? And then it would add those up for each iteration, as we call it, giving me this distribution of potential total costs. So I can now see that I'm 90% confident that these risks will cost me less than 2.75 million. Or to put it another way, if I ran the same project 10 times, only 1 out of 10 of those 10 would cost more than 2.75 million. Yeah, the risk impact. Okay. But let's think about that. The figure we had a minute ago was, for our factored mean, was 1.3 million. Whereas I'm sitting here now at 2.7, which is actually double that. Right? But I'm really very confident that it will be less than that. And let's just see, a matter of interest, that 1.3 is going to be about 50%. So if I'd use that 1.3 million as my contingency, it's as likely, tossing a coin as to whether it will cost me more than that or less than that. Right? So I don't know whether you'd want to be in that position.
Trevor, so in terms of what we're looking at here, I'm kind of 50-50 that I'll be able to come in underneath this value of whatever it was, 1.3 or something.
1.3 million, which is about the same as that factored mean that we had from our...
Okay, but the other thing I'm a bit worried about is that it's still going up to, what, 5 million there?
That's a good point, yeah. It's actually going, all the way up to 5.5 million. Yeah, that would be slightly worrying, even if we had our 90% at 2.75 million as our contingency. If it went up to 5 million, it would still be 2 and a bit million out of pocket.
So actually, we said that
I think we need to have a look at that. Yeah.
In the first place, in that other report, we were looking at like 5.5 or 5.5 million or something, and here we're still seeing that could be a possibility. So that must be a lot of those risks happening.
That's right.
I think from a management point of view, we're going to have to look at our, that exposure and think about our risk tolerance, our risk appetite. How much risk do we actually want to take? But also, I'm a bit concerned that you've got all this risk in here. Can't we look at what we can? Can't we do something about it?
Yeah, that's really the next step in this, is that let's investigate the risks themselves. So what I've got on the right hand side here is what we call a tornado chart that is showing me which of the risks are affecting that overall total the most. So as you can see, I've highlighted groundworks problem. That actually says if we completely removed that risk, then my 90% confidence would have been 725,000 less. Right? If we click on another one here, the planning approval delayed, that would only save us 435. That's how much I would be reducing this figure by completely removing that risk. So let's for example just try that. So I'll create myself a scenario here, and I will say let's completely remove the planning approval delayed risk. Run that one again, and you can see that my 90% confidence has dropped down by that 400 and something thousand or so. But interestingly, I've actually dropped 1 million from that total. Right? So this is really showing me that planning approval delayed risk was what we tend to call a tombstone risk. It's very low probability, but if it occurs, it's going to have a very high impact. Right? And often when we're working with customers on these, this is the sort of risk that they try and negotiate with the client to try and work out whether or not they should take that out of the equation when putting a bids together. Because obviously, if you're going to put a fixed price and have to cover that, you need to have the contingency for it. If it's extremely unlikely, then in a way, you might win if it doesn't occur. Right. So
that could actually be make or break in your competitiveness
totally.
of this bid, because if you accept it on a small probability times impact, then you could be exposed to that huge amount. If you take it out, if you can negotiate it out with the customer, then obviously, you probably have to have a fairly mature customer to have that discussion.
I think that's a very good point, the mature customer there, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're looking at this is just the risk, that basket of risks, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Can we also have a look at the base costs? What's the base costs and the uncertainty?
Yeah, totally. Well, what I've actually done is I've got the input from the estimators and built a model to include the information about these base cost estimates as well. Right. So what we've got here is all of their different estimates and the single values that they came up with using their algorithms, etc. Which is why we've got some really exciting figures, like we think this will cost 3,169,768. There's probably a few cents in there as well or something, I'm not quite sure. But what I've done is to put some uncertainty factors against these, all right? Because as you mentioned before, there's a range of what they actually might be. Right?
So is that what I'm looking at in the blue column then?
That's what I've said there. So this one's a medium. Some of them, we're really accurate about, so we don't think there's any uncertainty. Then we've got low and high and so on. And what I mean by that, if I look at medium, is we can see over here, medium uncertainty is basically saying that my cost might be up to 5% less than that value that we got from the estimators, but it could even go up to 8% more than the value. Okay, and again, I can now take that, because obviously I've got some uncertainty there, as one of them, the different estimates will be varying by different amounts on each iteration of my Monte Carlo, and that lets me see a graph like this. So now the numbers are a lot bigger. Okay, we're up at 65 million now, because I've got the base cost and the risks associated in here as well.
Okay, so the base costs in there are with uncertainty, and you've got the risks all added together. Okay,
that's
right.
So the risks with their uncertainty, but the probability of them occurring or not. That's right.
Okay, all right. But I think if I'm looking at that properly, uncertainty is coming out at the top of my work. I'm getting used to looking at this chart on the right.
It's great, isn't it? Being able to work with it and see how things change.
It looks pretty bad. I mean, everybody says manage the risks, but actually this tells me I've got to manage the uncertainty.
I think you're right, actually. It is pretty unusual that, hopefully our estimates should be reasonably consistent, and it's because of the probability of them occurring that should be driving those. So I think we need to have a look at how we've gone about some of those. So if we go back to that, there's uncertainty factors perhaps. So you said that was 8% more. Actually, Val, high uncertainty here, we've said it could go 20% more than the figures.
Well, that doesn't sound like we're doing very well there. Don't we have people who can do better than that?
I would hope so, because especially if we look at some of these estimates here, they're 2 and a bit million if high, and we're adding 20% onto that. That's a huge amount, and I've got at least a couple there I can just see straight away. So hopefully, I mean, that might just be me putting in the wrong value. What do you think we should do there? Is 110 more appropriate?
Well, I'd like to see the answers that come out with 110, see how much difference that makes. Because also, this is something we could go back to the customer, because we know at the moment, price of oil, the world tensions, gas, the whole inflation. We're suffering from problems with recruitment. There's all sorts of factors. So labour costs might go up, but maybe we have to negotiate that with the customer. I really think putting 20% on top there is too much. So what's that done for us now?
Right, so I've gone down, so we can actually see that our 90% confidence has dropped down a bit as well. So we're below the 65 million now, which is good. And in fact, it's risks at the top here, the planning approval and the groundworks ones, that are driving that overall uncertainty in terms of the 90% confidence.
Yeah. But luckily we're doing this early enough in the bid, so we still have some time to refine this, because I'm still worried about these numbers. I don't think we can bid at this amount. But I do understand, if we just pull a number out of the air and bid that, then we're gonna, it's going to eat our margin, or we're going to.
Of course. Right. So let's have a look at some of these individual risks then, and see if there's anything we can do with those. So if we go in and look at the sheets here, we can see the planning approval and the groundworks problem one. Now, the groundworks is one that we've come across quite a lot in previous bids, which is why we've got it down as quite a high percentage here, because it does happen a lot. But I was actually speaking to the engineers earlier, and they said that they'd already done a quick and dirty survey of the groundworks, and they think that it's quite unlikely, it's much less likely this time than in previous cases. So I think we should be okay to actually reduce that one down to 20%. You happy with that?
Well, again, I'd like to have a look at it. We are going to need to go back and verify this with everybody, because we can't just make too many guesses here. But let's look at the answers.
I think what we need to do is what if these things are true, and then we can really validate things. Let's do.
All right. And what about that planning? What about that planning risk? That looks huge. Is that really going to be the case?
I think that is a bit unusual, isn't it? So do you think? Yeah, let's try it. In fact, it might just be somebody made a little bit of a mistake when coming up with the figures, and we're a million too much, really. And
this isn't messing around with our database of risks, is it? Because we need the audit trail in the database to see where we've come from. But
totally.
So we're just looking at the answers here, but we would have to make a note of this and go back to the database and
all we're doing now is trying things out to see what the effect might be, so that we can actually then work out how to get these things done in practice. And in fact, if we're changing actual values, I can just click on my button here, and it will take me straight back to the database that we can put the values into the database.
Yep. Okay.
We're now below 64 million. Okay, I think that 64 million was that magic figure that you had in mind in terms of what we need to be at to be able to bid things.
Yeah, feeling happy with that, and it doesn't look like quite such a the issue of the exposure on the right hand side. Okay, well I think we've still got some more work to do, but I think I'm going to leave you to it. You need to go back and talk.
We just have a think about how we're going to do the contingency for the project manager.
Okay.
Now let's think in ahead. So obviously I've got the combined bits here, right? But I think what we need to look at is the risks sitting there on there. He says, hopefully, come on, sitting on their own. Oh, there we go.
It's late. It's a bit tired, I think.
Yeah, there's my risk view here. So I think what we said is sort of learning from the Babcock view. If we give the project manager a 50% value, so just over $500,000 here,
okay,
then we can keep the rest in reserve. So we're up to our 90%, which is all we were looking at. Then we've got the 1.8 million there, so we've got about $1.25 million sitting there to cover if some of these risks actually do occur. The project manager can come to us and draw that down. But hopefully that's for you to protect that margin.
Well, that makes me quite happy. Yes, I think in terms of managing the risk, we need to have some, we need to have a strategy. And I think what Babcock were doing makes a lot of sense. Obviously, we still need to look at our, whether we're bidding at that 90% confidence, but a balance of just over £500,000 for the project manager and 1.25 for management to keep back sounds quite good to me. So okay, all right. Well, I'll leave you to it then. So keep up the work. The bid's got to be in what next Wednesday, is it? So a bit of time to go yet. Right. Okay. I'm going to go back and have a think about what the benefits are then. Right, so we were using Predict to do that. The big screen is Risk Controller. The little one in the bottom right is Risk Analyzer. We focus on delivering integrated tools for people because moving data from one place to another is quite a big headache, especially when you're in a really pressured bid environment. You need to have stuff right there at your fingertips. Especially these days, a lot of bids are international. So you're not just sharing stuff locally on something like an Excel spreadsheet, nightmare. We also have other bits to predict, like Risk Visualizer. It can sit on the cloud or on premise. And we also have an API, which means you can connect risk from all over the place and onto all sorts of devices. Right, so what are the benefits then? Well, first of all, you want to build confidence in your budget. And I think my view is there are 6 ingredients to that. First of all, you need a risk intelligent, mature approach to your contingency budgeting. And it's too late once you're in a bid trying to work out how you're going to calculate this stuff. You need to have a process in advance. Good quality risk and uncertainty data. That's absolutely fundamental. Time and expertise, again, because you're in a very pressured environment, you need people who know what they're doing, and you need to make sure you start early enough so that you can go round the loop a few times, because the first answer you get is probably going to be horrendous. You aren't going to be able to bid that first answer, so don't wait until the last minute. You need to have innovative problem solvers, and because you actually need to be able to manage and reduce those risks, and talking to managers, communication skills. So Trevor and I are having a bit of fun here, having a chat about it. In a bid, you might not, it might be a little bit more fraught. And finally, mature decision makers, because in the end, senior management are the ones that have to make the decision on these bids. They need good information, they need to trust you. You need them to be to take a mature approach. And the benefits, we're trying to deliver profit margin, or if you're a government organisation, deliver the scope and capability that you promised. As a contractor, if you can save something like 2% across your projects, like Babcock did, I think most managers would bite your hand off for that. The challenge is achieve your return on investment, because what you want to do is make sure that you're not spending extra money on this project when you should be deploying it on capital expenditure elsewhere. There are the softer side of the things as well. Having a positive reputation, it helps you win more bids. Customers are not going to take a very positive attitude towards you if you're failing on projects and trying to bid something new. And in this current day and age, retaining staff and delighting customers is absolutely fundamental. Talking about customers, this is a selection of people that we work with, and a delightful community of people that we have. If you want a bit of further reading, then there's our risk intelligence white paper, talks all about a positive approach, proactive approach to risk. The Babcock case study, we've also got a little information on understanding uncertainty and risk. And lastly, if you need help, we provide consultancy services. We do quite a lot of bid consultancy with our customers. We also have a fantastic help desk who respond, especially when people are doing bids. It's usually a help, we need the answer by this afternoon. And often it's not about how to press buttons, it's actually, why does my answer come out like this? So we often end up looking at the bid values with our customers, helping them make sense of it. Right, so we've come to our Q&A session, and I hope that you've enjoyed the webinar. If you, as I said earlier, if you missed our first webinar, you can catch up by going to our website, find it there. Our next webinar, do sign up for it. the topic next time is, are you taking about the right amount of risk? And I think we've got some questions coming in. If we're using the sum of the factored means, the risk contingency as our bucket, is that essentially equivalent to using the 50% confidence result from a Monte Carlo analysis assessment? The answer to that, the short answer is no. It's not.
Yeah.
Because the mean value is an average, and the contingency, so the 50% confidence is what you call a what's it called? It's the mean, the median. Yeah, the 50% confidence is the median value. So it's, if you've got a distribution that's beautifully symmetrical, the mean and the median, the 50% confidence, will be the same value. But if you've got a skewed distribution, and I can tell you in a project is going to be skewed, because your upside positive side is not going to be as good as your downside negative side, even if you make sure you've not given the project managers all the money just to spend. So no, the answer is no.
I think it's especially if your ranges of values are very skewed, as you said. You know, if you've sort of got something that's if it happens, it's a 10 as the lowest value, 20 as the most likely value, but 100 as the highest possible value, then the mean is going to be nowhere near sort of values that you're ending up with.
And that's one of the reasons why projects are so hard to beat. It's so hard to beat the schedule because of all the logic parallel activities going on, and it's so hard to beat budgets if people are just taking a simplistic type of mean value for the contingency. So, you know, particularly for risks. Okay, we've got another question here. How do you gather risk and uncertainty data under the time pressure of a bid? Oh, that's difficult. Trevor, did you want to answer that one?
Well, start early and do lots of iterations and begin to look at information as soon as you're getting it. A number of times we've worked with people who've been saying, oh, we can't do a risk analysis yet because we haven't made, haven't finessed our estimates and worked out all the probabilities of the risks. Well, if you start earlier, even on the most basic information, it will help you identify which are the risks, or in fact, as we had in our case, is it the uncertainty around your estimates that are actually driving the change in potential bid price the most. So the earlier you can start, you can begin to find the key drivers and start working on those and reducing the potential impact of those earlier on, and then keep on going through as you've managed to finesse the data.
Yeah. I'd also add a couple more things to that. I think, first of all, get your senior management on board very early. Whenever I do a bid, I usually go in at the very early stages, get senior management together and say, okay, what do you think this, what do you think we're going to price this at? People in the business do have a pretty good understanding of what's likely to be the outcome, the outturn on a project price, especially probably more so on more repetitive projects in infrastructure and road building and things like that. But I think it's also important to make sure that you've primed your team that they're going to be expected to engage in helping with understanding the uncertainty and the risk, because too often people just see it as a negative add-on. That's, they're so busy just doing the core stuff. And the answer is, well, as you're doing the estimates, why aren't you thinking about the uncertainty at the same time? In fact, you're actually going, ooh, what number I'm going to put down for this? What could be the worst case? What's the best case? But then all that information is just lost. So why aren't people doing that as they go along? If you don't do it as you go along, then you're probably not going to find it very difficult to get there. We often find that time variable risk is quite significant, i.e. costs that move with the schedule. Do you model? Oh, yes, we do. We're actually going to do that as part of our next session. We're going to talk about the integration of cost and schedule. So we tried to keep it simple in these first two sessions, just to explain the basics of coming up with your schedule, coming up with your cost. But of course, time means money. So if you if you overrun, that's going to, and I remember a customer I worked with a lot over the years talk about the marching army cost, the marching army. So if you're delayed, then you've got to pay all your you've got overheads. There's other things like penalties, but of course you can't put penalties in your bid. That's but you have to make sure that you're considering that, because if you were to have penalties, then it's going to eat into your margin. But yes, it is really important to join the cost and schedule together. And so join our next webinar, and we'll cover that.
You can certainly include the probability of penalties in your analysis. Don't put it in your bid, as you say, but you can certainly put that sort of thing in there as well and include it in the model. So that's something we ought to try and see if we can include in that next the next webinar. Yeah. Interesting one on here on our stance of whether or not you should include opportunities within the analysis. Yeah, because
okay. Well, I think that is $1 million question. That one, fantastic question. Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, one of the things you have to be very careful of is netting opportunities off against risk, because in my experience in projects, when projects start to go wrong, then you're barely managing to firefight, manage the risks, let alone achieve and exploit the opportunities. So it can be a bit of a dangerous thing to just net them off in simplistic terms. I think my preference is when you find an opportunity, then to actually take it into the baseline and actually start exploiting it. I've got a favourite saying that of somebody I used to work with who says, the problem with risks is that they happen to you. The problem with opportunities is they just disappear. And disappearing opportunities, you have to be prepared to take opportunities. Trevor, any thoughts on that?
I think in a way it's similar to making sure that you're performing your mitigation actions and getting those into the baseline as well, to make sure you're at the right level of contingency to taking into account threats. It is probably far too optimistic to include the potential for opportunities occurring when you're trying to put your bid budget together, because the moment they don't occur, because as you say, you haven't got the time to even try to exploit them, then that's your margin going straight away. So treat them as an opportunity to enhance your margin, rather than effectively, if you put them in and include them, it's a threat that they don't occur.
After the bid, in the run phase, how often do you recommend CRAs run, and should it affect contingency values? Well, obviously it depends on the length of the project, the size, what resources you've got. On the Olympic Village, they were running both SRA and CRA every month, and every month management wanted to know how you're going to get it back to the confidence and the value, the budget, the schedule, deadline. It's not so much about what the results of the CRA and SRA are, it's what are you going to do about it. The more regular, the better. But on some projects, I can see it would make sense to do it on, say, a quarterly basis. But ideally, I think it's monthly. And contingency values, well, I could talk a whole day on contingency values. I'm working with on the ISO value management guide at the moment, where we're looking at embedding more about contingency values into the whole project program process, the guidance. And in terms of contingency values, well, you should be tracking that not just monthly. I think you should be tracking it weekly, looking at what you're spending, because you can do it in real time, as long as you link together your risk register and the risk processes with your project processes. Because any time that a risk occurs or a new risk emerges and you need to do a mitigation action, it should be drawn down into the baseline. And then the baseline is uplifted, the risk register has money spent out of it, budget disappears. So yeah, it's a very big topic, but I think it's really common sense, and more people should be engaged in looking at how that contingency drawdown is happening. Yes, Gary, contingency is one of those things. I've spent the last month trying to get the ISO 258 committee to agree some different definitions of contingency. it's a tall order. So yes, perhaps we should just have a webinar purely on contingency. That would be an interesting one. Yeah, how you draw it down. Okay,
probably a good idea. I think we'll put that into the list of webinars for later on this year, Val. Great idea.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. We got a question from John. How are you managing prolongation costs in your modelling? Is the model aware of critical paths?
That sort of goes back a bit to what we were doing in the previous webinar when we were looking at schedule and how schedule elongates. Perhaps that's also moving forward and thinking about what we'll be looking at in the third webinar as well.
Yes, because I think my understanding of this question is probably about looking at what we call the marching army cost. You have to link schedule and cost together. You can't calculate a budget properly unless you understand how long the schedule is going to be. One of the things that working on a working group some time ago with the APM, we looked at putting schedule buffers in because if you're going to have schedule reserve going into the project, then that costs money. How do you budget for that? The main thing is it's all got to be out in the open and clear. You need to understand exactly what you're spending and when. So that's the way I would suggest the prolongation costs in the modelling have to be costs linked to your schedule. Probably a high level schedule, a level 1, 2 or 3 schedule, not a schedule that's got 10,000 activities in it. Because that way you're really catering for the critical paths. Unless there's any more questions, then we'll say goodbye to you all, good day, and
thank you very much, everyone.
See you at the next webinar.